a game, but it's not fair. I break the rules, so I don't care. So I keep doing my own thing, walking tall against the
Good day, everyone. I want to thank you all for coming out to a special segment with the Voices of Women of Color. We are here today to acknowledge Overdose Awareness, which will be taking place on August 31st. And as you know, in the communities that we work and door knock, we have several folks who are struggling and fighting with addiction, and some of them who are families who have been hurt or troubled by overdose. So before we get started, plus I wanted to take a little time and acknowledge some of the voices who can't be here. We have some women fighting breast cancer and women having surgeries, and so in women organizations, these conversations are pertinent because they're going to be dealing with taking different types of prescriptions, and to talk about how, you know, when you're dealing with one health issue, how you can, you know, acquire other addictions, trying to get healthy. And so I want to first say to the voices who are fighting breast cancer, we love you, and we wish you could be here today, and stay strong and keep fighting. So let's go around. As you know, I'm Janice, the CEO of Voices of Women of Color.
Hi, Donna Marcano.
Carla, President of Voices of Women of Color.
Hi, Sierra, Foot Soldier.
Hi, Brandy Hall, Better Way Foundation.
Hi, Evelyn Dukes, Leadership Recruiter.
Hi, Paula Brown, Voices.
Larice Harvey, founder of Civic Trust Public Lobbying Company, Policy Director of A Better Way Foundation.
Sarah Diamond, I'm a public health researcher, and I have my own research consulting, Diamond Research Consulting.
So we would like to welcome you all here for sharing in the conversation. Civic Trust is our partnering lobbying firm where we deal with our social issues around drug policy, education reform, public health disparities. Diamond Research Consulting helps us analyze our data. We work with them in partnership as well on public health, so we would like to thank you, Sarah, for being here, a strong partner of ours. And Larice, I wanted to turn it over to you because I know there's been some victories this past legislative session. I know the Voices have participated in going up to the LOB and dealing with a bunch of issues during this past session, and was very happy with the outcome and seeing the work of Senator Coleman and State Representative Matt Ritters and some of the other representatives, Kirkley Bay, and those folks responding to some of the legislation that we wanted to see pushed. And in terms of overdose awareness and some of the bills that was passed that deals with, I like to call it like public health issues, right? What was some of those successes that was happening in terms of stuff that Governor Malloy was supporting? I know he championed a bunch of that stuff, and I wanted to see and hear from you on what that looks like so far and where we're going with this.
Okay, so there was approximately 8 pieces of legislation that we successfully passed and it's coming into law. So, you know, the penalty for certain nonviolent drug offenses, which is the decrim bill, came into effect July 1st, and it's for a ½ ounce or less of marijuana and any paraphernalia with marijuana. You'll get the citation. You have to pay a fine of $150. After the third one, you have to pay for your own treatment or counseling for that. And anyone that's a juvenile, they get arrested as a delinquent, and their parents are notified, and they got to go through the system, but they won't have a record for it.
Just real quickly, Larice, have we figured out how to market that specific language from the ground up so that the community can understand this new law that's being put in place? Have we seen that come from either the community or the governor's side?
Well, what's happening is a lot of police departments are doing deciding how they're going to handle themselves. Okay. And I'll give you a good example. So in New Haven, they give people the tickets, right? New Haven's used to dealing with this. In North Haven, they're actually arresting the individuals for the 4 ounces or less, and with possession and intent to sell and everything like that. So a young white male actually, he had a little pipe with residue in it. He didn't even have any usable weed on him, and when his car got searched, the police officers arrested him for the 4 ounces or less because they said they don't understand about the whole $150 less than a half ounce stuff, so they just arrested him for the 4 ounces or less. And so when he goes to court, I guess, you know, they're going to decide what they're going to do with that. But I believe it's the governor's office and the judicial branch to educate the police officers on how to conduct that, because this is the law now. And on the ground, we have fact sheets that we passed out. So I'm not really getting a lot of phone calls from the community folks in the urban communities. I'm getting more phone calls from suburban and rural folks like, wait a minute, I thought this bill passed. So I think there needs to be more education about what the penalties are, what your rights are, and you know, let people know that after 3 citations, because the first one's 150, each subsequent one can either be 200 or 500 or anywhere in between. So my thing is just don't get caught. Simple, plain and simple.
I have a question with that. I understand the fines and everything, but what about rehabilitation or some kind of recovery or some kind of drug program? I mean, are they just going to find them, or are they going to try to get them help, or are they going to find them until they can commit them and put them in jail?
Well, that's
For marijuana?
Yeah.
yes. So what's happening, and then I want to really swing back to the focus of why we're here today. But the thing about the marijuana citations is to say that if it's marijuana, depending on what side of the fence you're on, it's either helpful or it's non-helpful. To us, this was a means of helping people who use marijuana for medicinal purposes from being protected and not being incarcerated. You know, and it's not so much for, you know, people who use it, you know, free willy, but for individuals who actually use marijuana for medicinal purposes was why we did that, because we didn't get medical marijuana, and we're hoping to get it next year. The other thing is that we felt like individuals who are responsible adults, marijuana, small amount of marijuana should not be used to ruin your whole life. You should not have to go to prison for it. You should not have to do anything if you're responsible. Now, if you keep getting caught with marijuana, and you know that's why on the 3rd one you have to go to treatment, and but you as the individual pay for that treatment. For our younger juvenile, our youth, what happens with them is that they immediately get into treatment and education about drug abuse and things like that. For an adult, it's on you. It's your responsibility.
So, by the number of hands outside of marijuana, how many of you have known somebody who have done heroin, cocaine, methadone, crack? What's the other one? Crystal meth?
Yep,
That's
crystal
like
meth.
rural, but
Dust.
dust. You know, we don't talk about dust. Ecstasy or all of the above, right? And and I think trying to figure out how to even define overdose can become complicated, because I swear to God, I see some of these kids on dust and then they trip out or whatever, and because they may not be all passed out with a needle in their arm, we are not considering that to be
I had the same.
overdose.
That's not an overdose,
right?
isn't that
It's
a psychological breakdown in your brain.
But that can be
From an overdose, right?
Right. That's a chemical, imbalance or a breakdown, which is, pretty much you done OD'd on some drug.
You done did too much.
So overdose, what overdose is mostly connected to is heroin and prescription opiates, and it's because your heart stops, your lung stops, and you can't. You're basically dying. All your organs are starting to shut down. With a psychiatric episode, none of your organs is shutting down, just your brain.
Right.
You know, but maybe we do need to redefine what overdose is, because
That's
you
what
can
I believe.
overdose on any drug,
That's right.
a Tylenol, an aspirin,
Exactly.
and have some kind of breakdown happening to your physical and
What you
physiological
gonna say,
being.
Paula?
I was gonna say a lot of people enter the drug lifestyle without even knowing the side effects, or without even knowing that they could possibly die, they could possibly overdose, and any other side effects. A lot of people don't know, so it should be like more programs and more people teaching the youth about the drugs, so they won't go do it. Because a lot of people just following other kids, they're doing it because other people, or they see their parents doing it.
Well, then
Well, what about the
sometimes-
argument that is made? I hang out with some folks who, you know, maybe it's not marijuana. Maybe their dependency is heroin. Maybe their dependency is crack. Maybe, I don't know, prescriptions. Do they have the right to fight for the drug of their choice to be legal? I'm posing that question because, you know, this is the argument about medical marijuana, right? Do they have the right to fight for the legalization for marijuana with the understanding that it's medical marijuana? Would a person argue that they have the right to legalize heroin for medical purposes?
First of all, with illicit drugs, you have to first go to the history of the person. A lot of young people that start off using street drugs, something has happened to them in their life. You just don't, you know, wake up one day and say, I'm going to be a heroin addict. You know, they're trying to cover something up. They're trying to hide something that hurt them within themselves. And until we can realize and get to the point of what's going on in families and try to get them therapy, then you can start turning it around. It won't be so many overdoses. These children or these adults don't grow up one day thinking and saying, I'm going to be a junkie.
But wait a minute, I just want to say this. I know this wonderful woman, Mary Marcuccio. She's a white suburbanite. She has an organization, Parents for Change, and she's been dealing with this. And there's most of the people in her organization are white men and women from rural suburban Connecticut, who elite, you know, well-to-do, better off. I think there's only a few of them that are poor, what we would consider poor, and all of their kids started out in middle school or some kind of activity, having farm parties. And so that's where kids will go into their parents' medicine cabinets, throw all the pills into the bowl, and then they pick a pill. So you got boys taking birth control because they don't know what they taking, that can make them sterile. You got girls taking, you know, something that probably got testosterone in it and messing her body up, and then all of a sudden they might get something like Oxycontin and make them feel good, and then they start wanting that pill again. And then next thing you know, they're pushing their grandparents, their parents' pill from a backache, hip surgery, something like that. You're talking about the woman with the breast cancer, they're gonna be on some heavy drugs. And so those drugs, you know, Percocets and all that stuff, Valiums, you know, and then they get there, and then they're selling it, and it's $40 for a gram, and then next thing you know, wait a minute, for $40 I can get a couple of bundles. I can get a bundle for $5 and get better high. And next thing you know, they're doing a heroin instead of the prescription drug now, because the access costs them too much, and they can't cover it anymore.
It's not access.
It's not accessible.
It's mental and
Right.
emotional issues.
But those kids got mental, emotional issues
that
too.
Get them to where they're at right now.
Right.
So, I mean, it's a different thing. We got inner city and you got suburbia. Suburbia got access. Our inner city children, they don't have access. They have emotional breakdown problems. Their homes are not right. You know what I'm saying? And then they fall into this friend thing or family thing to where, come on, you know what I'm saying, I'm your family, this and that, and then they start that drug thing. A lot of our children have been molested, they've been raped, they've been hungry, you know what I'm saying, they've been physically abused and everything. That's where their emotional and their habits come from.
How you feel about it, Tierra? About overdose and the difference in social issues? Because, Carla, I disagree with you slightly in terms of, I agree with the access, right? The question of access. What does urban versus suburban communities have in terms of access? Where I disagree with you is this notion that our kids are the ones being only raped. No. But when you, well, then let's clarify.
No, we'll clarify that.
I want to be clear
I didn't say that.
I think the suburban communities oftentimes have greater issues because Biggie said it best: more money, more problems. But we don't, because you got money. Sometimes you get to kind of cover up some of those things. But what we're seeing happen, even with Mary Group, is that suburban towns are saying, hey, wait a minute, over here.
Right, it's happening.
Okay, you want to talk about legalizing marijuana?
They say that only when it starts to happen to them. We go through this everyday basis thing. You hear what I'm saying? Our kids die every single day.
Of everything.
No one says anything. But once it starts happening in suburban towns, now there's an issue. That's my point.
Okay. My question is for Sarah. Hi, Sarah. How many people on the streets said they had an overdose, and what experience were they, and where were they at?
That's interesting. I was trying to think. I did research on polydrug use amongst urban youth in Hartford, and it was mostly ages 18 to 30, and a lot of them were more in their 20s. At that age, the folks that were coming into our study, they didn't exactly. And the focus was more on MDMA and on dust or wet or illy, so they didn't really have too much experience with overdose, like that type of, obviously if they OD'd and they died, they wouldn't be there, so that eliminates, that is a reality. And there was a situation that was reported in the media in the past, during the period of the study about someone who had OD'd on MDMA, and there were a lot of questions about what was in the pill, because you don't always know when someone ODs. They might have thought they took MDMA, but if they bought it on the street, you have no way of knowing what was in it, and what might have caused the overdose. So there was some talk that it wasn't just MDMA that caused the overdose, and there's other factors. There's dehydration and things like that come in with MDMA. So those were the kinds of issues that we were talking about. But heroin wasn't so pronounced in the research that I did, so I can't speak to that from my own studies, but I know from other studies they do show that heroin use is as prevalent, if not more prevalent, in suburbs, and it is more hidden, it's more underground. I mean, in the sense that the people who are using, oftentimes they even have steady jobs. You wouldn't know that they were users, but they're shooting up and secret, and then when they overdose, there are similar issues as far as just not accessing naloxone and things that could help with preventing their death. So these are, the overdose, I think the overdose issue as far as access to naloxone, there is a way that the two groups can come together around that issue, because it affects them, both groups, equally. I think, overdose is an issue that is more pronounced in the suburbs than in urban areas, and there's a lot of misperceptions even about drug use in general, that it's higher in urban areas when it's not. There are, I think, maybe the compounding factors of higher rates of incarceration, on top of overdose, on top of poor access to resources, poor access to counseling, lack of resources around the issue of drug use, that then leads to more disparities in negative health outcomes for youth in the inner city compared to youth in the suburbs.
So that brings me to like two things that I wanted to say. That from 1999 to 2011, 2,200 people died of overdose in the state of Connecticut. Approximately 65% of all overdose deaths are white males ages 15 to 25. And the sad part to all of this, besides it just being about death and dying and overdose, is that 78% of Connecticut's population is white. but 70% of the prison population is black and Latino. And so when we're having this conversation and we're talking about overdose and we're trying to define it for ourselves, because there is a system. We passed legislation that comes to effect October 1st that if you call 911, it's called the Good Samaritan Bill. If you call 911 when you think someone's having an overdose, like ODing, like they're dying, they took some bad drugs, then when the police arrive, they're supposed to take the paraphernalia, call the ambulance, they revive the individual, nobody gets arrested, that individual is supposed to go into some kind of treatment or something. Well, and the suburban people, what they want is not just that protection, because they have found their kids, their sons, their daughters OD'd in their house and call 911 because they didn't know what was going on, and then the cops come and arrest them, the parent, because the heroin is there, the needle is there, arrest their kid, and so then they were like, well, what can I do? What could I have done to save them? There's a woman, Susan, she found her son blue. Like, that's one of the symptoms. She found him blue in the face, and what happened was they had to use naloxone. Now, naloxone revives you. Everybody say Pulp Fiction when put that. Well, it's right. So they did. The ambulance did it 3 times, and you're only supposed to do it twice. The third time he came through. Now imagine when you guys, I know the Voices, y'all do a lot of campaigns, so imagine you out there campaigning, registering people, handing out your pamphlets and stuff. Wouldn't you like to be certified to carry naloxone, so that if you see somebody in the community hunched over, you recognize the symptoms, that you can revive them and get them treatment? Because that's how we're going to recover our community, by doing it ourselves. We can only ask legislators and politicians and policymakers, make this law happen, so we can do what we can do to survive, make sure that our community is healthy and fine. But I agree with you, Carla. Our issues is not that suburbans don't have rape, molestation. It's not that they don't have mental health issues. It's that the police and insurance and their society and the media cover it up so that they are protected, so they have more access to treatment and things like that.
Exactly.
But
and let me say something about drug awareness. In every home in America, suburban and inner city, if your child is doing drugs, you have to know the signs. There's no excuse to say you didn't know. They laying a cold blue on the floor. When they done came in there, their attitude changes, their demeanor changes, they start losing interest in things, they look scraggly. Check your medicine cabinet, check your liquor cabinets, check your wallets. You have to know the signs in order to help your children. You have to know the signs.
It can all come down to, having a law passed where your med should be under lock and key.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, stop your kids from getting to them.
Tierra, you're 21, right? Tell me what's going on with young people in urban communities.
Well, right now, I feel like...
What drug they doing?
They doing, a lot of people I know, they doing dust. They doing cocaine. They smoke marijuana. And I just feel like the youth, we need to be more educated into the side effects, like she said, of the drug use. We need to come together as a community and explain to these kids that, that's not the way to go. We really have to step up and educate the kids more, because they going around thinking that it's cool and it's not.
That's because we have lack of resources. When you have lack of resources in the inner city, you know what I'm saying, we tend to get overlooked. Suburbia has a lot of resources. Even this bill speaks more of them than it does the inner city. So until we can come together as one for the sake of all our children.
That's what I wanted to ask about, Larice, because when we're talking about overdose, we've specifically mentioned heroin and more the depressants, but I haven't heard you actually mention things like dust or crack or anything. I mean, are those overdose?
Is in your
and alcohol poisoning, So all of that is a part of this movement to address all of.
No, I think what's happening is,
but that needs to be
I think what's happening is, agency is being raised, and the question is being raised around. I hear what you're saying, but really, in my hood, You know, just because they walking around and they done fell out cold blue, don't mean they ain't an overdose. Don't mean they in a psycho,
all kind of mental
psycho
stuff
state
that's
of
when
mind.
people are
Don't mean
doing dust.
so. If we're gonna have this conversation about overdose awareness, then the conversation has to basically be about a framework in which we're working from. So this, you know, this question of heroin, right? This question of, that doesn't it say it doesn't exist, right? Because we all know what a dope block is in the hood. However, what we're not hearing about, right, there's a distinction being made for medical marijuana. We're not addressing angel dust and the effects that has, how that gets played out. Ecstasy and how that gets played out.
Where our kids are smoking embalming fluids soaked in a joint.
Well, that's what I wanted
You know what I'm saying? So does this define all drugs?
Right. I was wondering if overdose also includes the kind of mental health conditions that sometimes result from drug use. I mean, is it only death? Is it only, you know, or is it the fact that we do have people kind of losing their minds and we don't have hospitals for them to, you know, places where they can be treated, not just in recovery, but just for the condition.
Follow-up care, ongoing care, outpatient care. All of that. We need follow-up care, ongoing care, outpatient care. Yes, Larice, I'm sorry.
I just want to respond because you guys are bringing up, which is why I brought this conversation here, is because you guys are bringing up very valid points. Because overdose awareness and overdose death has nothing to do with anything else you guys are talking about. It has everything to do with prescription drugs and opiate drugs and heroin. You know what I mean? Because those are the things that people OD from, and that's where the awareness from. But you have brought the awareness to another level to include, maybe we need to look at someone, because what overdose means you took an overdosage of a certain drug. So maybe we need to be looking at wet,
and I'm gonna tell you why.
I'm gonna tell you why, you know, ecstasy and things like that. And what can we do? Because maybe that, you know, maybe it may not be such a physical death, but a mental death is worse.
Or let's go this way with it.
And then, you know what I'm saying? I mean, the reason why I'm not saying that it's worse in the sense of, you know, a life is a life. You know what I'm saying? All life is precious. But if you, but you can't recover from a mental psychotic breakdown if you damage your brain like LSD and
well, we have to have this conversation.
But we need to, like, let's talk a little bit more about that.
Too many young women coming up in the voices, okay, who may have smoked wet during pregnancies and get to the hospital and their kids is being taken away for heroin or opium. So you can't say on one hand that, oh, they're just smoking wet or whatever, and on this hand, you know, that we have heroin or whatever, because at the end of the day, they're putting them on the same playing field. You understand what I'm saying? We have women who kids are being taken straight from the hospital. No recovery, no nothing. Oh, your baby, you tested with heroin. DCF has been called. We're here to get your kid. Heroin and opium, but it's not heroin, right? So then you got the young girl saying, I don't do heroin. I don't smoke opium. I don't do heroin. What they talking about? I ain't sniffed no bags or whatever. Not knowing the bag of weed she bought may have been laced with a little dust or whatever, but now it's coming back like heroin.
Or she was on a prescription that the doctor gave her
that
had that medication in it.
Who forgot to say
and
that
then her child is taken away.
So there, you know.
So you have to be very careful about what you put in your body, you know what I'm saying, and what's going around. But my question to Larice is, because this bill keeps bothering me, because, okay, is the inner city community organizers going to get a pen that they can wear on the side of their pack and notify VC? Because I'm CPR certified and first aid certified, okay? So is that going to be for me to carry around on my pocket when I'm in my community, or is that just for suburbia? Because that bill right there was just made for suburban kids, if you ask me.
Okay, so what the bill actually does, all it does is, like, when you call 911, it protects anybody from getting arrested. the person who's in the overdose state and the people around them, even if there's drugs present. That's the bill that passed. What I am challenging, and which is what I was talking about earlier, and was about we should have access to naloxone and carry it with us, being certified like CPR, emergency first aid, and stuff like that, like an EpiPen. And the reason why I'm saying that is because us organizers who are on the ground and in those neighborhoods, regardless if it's suburban, rural, or urban, when we go and knocking around and we can recognize the symptoms, it's about saving that life, regardless of what that. What about? It's not about all that stuff.
Right there, I want to save a life.
But see, the police officers were arresting people even if you called, and it wasn't about saving that life. That's why we need the 911. I'm saying we need to expand that because we need to have access to naloxone too. Now, mind you, like you said, suburban rural communities, they have access to naloxone. They have it illegally now, but they have it so they can revive their own kids. We don't even have access to it. The App Foundation in New Haven, they give people that who you have to go, like you have to go there, say that you're an addict, get the prescription, do their program, but you carry it with you. You know, that's a law that passed too. But there is no access for colleges or anybody like that. You have to call 911, and that person can be dead already. But I really want to like talk a little bit more about the point you made. Now let me just say this. And when I was 15 and 16, I did the Just Say No to drugs, teenage pregnancy prevention stuff. Just Say No. We was the biggest alcoholics, drug users for Just Say, and we knew all the things, STDs you can get, what heroin does, cocaine does, weed does, everything. Just educating people, young people who, you know, we can be rebellious, and our youth can be rebellious, say I'm gonna try it anyway, see if that stuff really means what it says. It's not the education of not using it, it's the education around what can happen to you if you chose to use it. It's also people have the right who are active users to use as long as they're using responsibly and not harming anyone. So you got to think about the person on methadone. They are someone who is using. They may not say that. They'll say they're in recovery, but methadone is a drug that is similar to heroin that is given by a doctor or a clinic, you know, so that person won't get sick and they can function. Pure heroin from a doctor is easier to kick than methadone. Pure heroin from a doctor, if we medicalize it, we'll have less people overdosing.
Well, that's what I want.
We will have more people being educated on it, and then while they're in there and they're getting, you know, a little bit less of heroin, they can get the treatment for their psychological issues and their physical issues.
I can tell you right now,
that's
for the voices. This bill going to have to, you know, this conversation is going to have to be expanded to deal with what we find to be the overdose issues in our communities, right? Now, we going to align with the suburban communities because, hell, we got some poor-ass white women out there that need our help. You know, some of them got big houses, but they empty and cold in the inside because, you know, paying for treatment or whatever the case may be will break you, right? Lack of education won't get you access, but resources will break you. And so they got some other kind of problems as well. However, and I'm sympathetic. Hear me. I am sympathetic to their problems, but the fact of the matter is the voices of women of color have to wake up, get outside their door every day, can't mask it with no big empty house. We bump into it on the sidewalks. We bump into it in the schools, in the bodegas. We bump into it when somebody's struggling, getting, you know, trying to get home because they done been high and now they done walk past a damn school because every block is a school, and now they getting arrested. They in the jail, don't know how they got there, why they got there. All of a sudden they a drug dealer when really they're an addict. If this bill, I can assure you that the voices of women of color will not tolerate any bill that does not begin to address drugs that we feel are affecting us in urban communities. We won't support that. Now, we have made the distinction, and we said we will align ourselves with them suburban folks. We feel bad for them. But hell, I feel bad for my kids who walking around here as zombies. And the drug of their choice is dust, ecstasy,
And e-pills.
And wet, that's the e-pills. Evelyn, you gotta get, that is the that's the
Ecstasy.
Yeah,
Okay, so we saying the same thing.
We saying the same
We're a
thing.
little outdated.
But see, what I'm saying is the reason why this is a very important conversation is because the 911 bill that passed and is law pretty much. It only addressed opiates. What you guys raised is like, okay, let's take a look at all these other drugs that affect our community, meaning community of color and poor, which is dust, wet, ecstasy, and not put no criminal charge to it, but how do we salvage? How do we salvage? What kind of legislation that's going to benefit our community that's not putting somebody in prison? What do you guys think is needed besides
saying to the suburban people who gonna need our help
to come out?
Right? No, let's put it on the table. Yeah. You know, because they the ones who may have a little more extra time to get up to the LOB and sit there for 9 to 10 hours, but at the end of the day, you know what I'm saying? We need to figure out how they understand what we're being affected by, as well as our understanding and empathy and sympathy of what they're being affected by. And what I think needs to happen is that some suburban folks and urban folks, which we've been doing, need to continue the dialogue and conversation about, your kids may be throwing pills in a barrel and everything and going through it, but we have some kids too who going on the next blocks buying some angel dust and having the same effect as your child. How do we begin to write up policy that is a 2-1 punch, right? Where we're dealing with what's affecting urban. What you said, Paula?
I have a question for Sarah. Do you think making people aware of overdose in communities of color and suburban rural communities will reduce HIV cases in Connecticut?
I mean, I think there have been studies that have tried to show a link between, drug use and HIV, and oftentimes the two go hand in hand. Certainly IV drug use and HIV is a known risk factor, and it's very prevalent amongst IV drug users, and there has been, I think, a lot of awareness around that. I think what people are less familiar with is the fact that any drug that you take, if you're not prepared mentally or you're not thinking straight about protecting yourself, obviously you're putting yourself at risk for HIV. And so the prevalence of HIV in urban communities, in particular in Connecticut, amongst African Americans and Hispanics is a major concern, and it does relate to lack of access to treatment. There's some more education that needs to be out there around people's risk, I think, for HIV, and just education in general about the effects of the drugs, but not like scare tactic kinds of education, but education that keeps it real in terms of, we realize that you're going to be in situations that may be risky. Here's how you can protect yourself in those situations and do a better job, keeping yourself and your family and your loved ones safe. So yes, I think there is a connection there that needs to be brought out. I also want to say that, with the opiate, the issue, there is substantial research in Connecticut especially, but that, the heroin use is more predominant amongst Hispanic Americans than in the African American community, where the more likely to be issues around crack cocaine use, if you want to talk about some of the harder drugs that are used.
Suburban.
So, so there are disparities there, and there are disparities in terms of what kinds of treatment are available, because you have methadone maintenance for heroin treatment, but you don't really have the same kinds of treatment available for people who are addicted to crack. So that creates other kinds of problems and disparities in terms of access to treatment, what's available, what's culturally competent in the communities, and around these issues to avoid ever getting to the place where they're overdosing.
That heroin use, you say Hispanic, suburban white is a high usage of heroin use.
That's what she said.
No, she said Hispanic.
She said white and Hispanic.
I misunderstood. I'm sorry. Because this bill is for opiates and heroin.
Right.
So when we talk about opiates and heroin, and the opiates meaning Percocets and Vicodin and oxycodone and oxycontin, that's not in the inner city. That's in suburbia. Lock up your medicine cabinets, put your your pills in your pocketbook and watch your children and know what's going on. We can't afford no Oxycontin, Vicodin, and Percocet.
Okay, we gotta wrap it up. Let you answer one more question, but before I let you do that, because I gotta let Larice have the last word, so I'll let you say it. And Larice, you know the Voices is a tough group. This is why you come over here to see what the bill gonna look like, what it's gonna look like. We're gonna continue this conversation because we're gonna be featuring this to broaden the conversation. But in terms of what the language says right now, is there room to include angel dust? Tell the truth, because you know we gonna want to know. Is it room to begin to make the distinction? Is it room to say to suburban America, hey, listen, heroin ain't really our choice, opiate ain't our choice, but we have these drugs we feel having the same effect on us that is having with you with heroin and opiate. So
I'm
Evelyn,
gonna read you what the law says.
Go ahead, real quick.
Okay, so emergency medical assistant for person experiencing a drug overdose to prevent deaths due to drug overdoses by encouraging persons to make emergency calls, summoning medical assistance without fear that seeking such assistance will lead to a prosecution for the illegal possession of drugs or drug paraphernalia. Now, it does not have any specification on which drug that is.
okay, so we need to be clear on
So, what can happen is, you know what I'm saying, to devise a new piece of legislation that includes looking at all these other drugs
Okay.
and making sure there's more medical assistance than there is incarceration.
Or
in
all
all
towns and inner cities in the
Well,
state of Connecticut.
this-
Because that sounds like a suburban bill to me.
But I understand what you're saying, Carla. But what I'm saying is, even but see, that's why I wish the other women were here who couldn't be here, because they would have a response to you, because they blame the police officers for not calling them and letting them know that they found their kid, you know, hunched over instead of just bringing them home, right? Because they have other things, but our police department arrest us, put us in jail. But that's what they say. That's how our kids are being saved, even though it's in a system. At least they're being saved, where their kids are just dying. So either you want your kid alive with a felony conviction, or you want your kid dead and you bury him, you don't see him at the dinner table anymore. The choice is yours. But I understand your argument though, because those other drugs that are happening in the urban community, what kind of protection do we have for them so that they can at least have a better life? We can address those mental health, family issues, and give them a better life, because they may not be using heroin today. They may not never use heroin, but they're using dust. They're using wet. They're using e-pills.
And all coupled with alcohol.
And all mixed in with alcohol.
Yeah.
So now think about this. Because our kids do consume a lot of alcohol mixed in with those drugs. If you call 911 and say, I think he's having alcohol poisoning, whatever else is in their system, you know what I'm saying, may pop up, but you call because it's alcohol, you think he's died of alcohol poisoning, and that's covered in this bill. So there is some, you know, it's not all that great, but there is some coverage for urban communities to use the alcohol poisoning piece to cover us. But I think we need to have a larger conversation.
Stan is telling me like this. It's time to wrap it up.
This was a great conversation.
Yes,
Well, we're gonna
I know
continue
Evelyn
on
wanted to have
the
another word. Donna, you wanted to say something too?
No, it's
You
okay.
sure? Evelyn, you wanted to squeeze that last thing in? She drilling the researcher.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sarah. Sorry.
Yes. Hi, Sarah. How you doing? I just want to know, how do you feel about the statistics on overdose? And with that following up, can you leave a word of encouragement to our viewers that might have a family member or a friend that's battling drug addiction?
I'm not so sure how to, leave it. I think bills and policy change is really what's needed, a step in the right direction. We need to address head-on these issues and join forces. I think the suburban community, the urban community needs to get behind these bills. People need to understand and talk to their policymakers and make them aware that this issue is a really important issue on all sides. Whether or not you end up with a felony conviction or you end up in, a $50,000 a year drug treatment facility, and, the toll it takes on people's families and their lives, the issues that we're dealing with are the same. Underlying, I think there needs to be more unification of groups coming together, joining forces to really make a dent in our policies and how we handle drug addiction and overdose.
And I just want to thank Larice for opening our eyes to the situation that's going on in the state of Connecticut. And I want people to remember that August 31st is Drug Overdose Awareness Day.
We will be continuing
And we will be continuing this program.
And
On Wednesday, we will be
Parker
continuing
Memorial.
Parker Memorial.
in partnership with Judah House, A Better Way
Foundation.
Civic Trust, holding a dialogue at Parker Memorial 6 to 8 on Overdose Awareness Day, where we can continue with this conversation. This is an important conversation.
This is an important conversation.
We all are affected by this. Larice, I wanted to say thank you.
Thank
you know,
you.
it's going to be tough
you,
here
Sarah.
when you come. And we wish we would have had our suburban ladies here, whatever, because we think that would have been able to
Right, you would have a better
tie
picture.
something together. But I think, you know, raising some of these other important questions in terms of how we, you know, the question of public health and women of color, you know, that's our self-interest. Partnering to deal with that is definitely one of our wishes, to do that with the suburban communities. So to all, thank you for sharing in on this conversation. We look forward to
Love
seeing
each
you
other and listen to your children.
Wednesday, August 31st.
Listen to your children.
All right. All right.
We all may have a family or friend that's battling something, so just God bless.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me,
That's
Voice
right.
of Women of Color. As always, I enjoy my conversations here, but you guys educate me just as well as I educate you. And so, Voice of Women of Color.
Thank you.
Good job.